So, just to backtrack, my diagnosis is cerebral palsy past quadriplegia. This means that all four parts of my limbs are impacted by a constant state of tension. And it's important to realize that that need that I have to illustrate the challenge of disability that exists. That challenge being mainly that my life is dependent on relationships. And my first relationship was with my parents, obviously. My mom and dad, having a baby that was born between 26 and 28 weeks premature, had their challenges. And on top of that, family histories of addictions. It doesn't make for a comfortable beginning. But what it did make was for a lot of unique and wonderful opportunities. If my dad's mom were here, she would tell you this story. And she would tell you that as she held me outside of the incubator, she prayed, Lord, if he cannot walk, at least let him speak. The joke now is that I never shut up. But the reality is it was intentional actions like that in those relationships that allowed me to become who I am today. And so one of the biggest relationships that I can stress is those parental relationships. And you might say, Tagen, how could you say that when your family was challenged as yours was? I can say that because it was out of that brokenness that allowed me to fall in love with education. And it was education that allowed me to develop those verbal skills, develop those opportunities to build strong, meaningful relationships because I didn't have it in the first place. Right? So for me, that was my educational assistant, John. That was my special education teacher, Mrs. Vicious, who both of which I am in contact with on and off to this day. So one of the things that I want to encourage you as we talk about the difficulties, whether you are a person with a disability or you're wondering how to balance the weight of that, because it is hard realizing limitations. I've had the benefit of having this my entire life. Um, but Ali has a bit of a different story. And so I'm going to turn it over to her to share a bit about her story, her background that brought her here today.
Thank you, Tagen. Hi, everyone. I'm Ali Cameron. For anyone who needs a visual description, I'm a white woman with short brown even hair. I'm wearing a white top, and there's a window with a cityscape behind me. Um, in terms of my relationship with disability, Tagen's right. I sustained a spinal cord injury when I was 14, and it was while I was on a family trip, and that was very clearly demarcates the day between pre-disability and actual disability. Um, and Higgins made me think a lot as he was describing sort of relationships and the power of relationships, how that sort of speaks to my own story in a way. And of course, I was 14, I was still a child. The injury happened 2 weeks before I was meant to go to boarding school. Um, my family was based in Argentina at the time, they still are, and I was due to go to boarding school in Canada. And of course, that didn't happen. But postponing everything by a year gave me a very clear goalpost, and my family too. And I think we all needed that. Like, we all needed to have something that we could rally with together to perhaps shy away from, or like put a spot of the trauma behind us and focus on the future. And that was very much the driving force for a lot of my physical rehabilitation and a lot of sort of the dynamics that came out of my accident within my family as well. And I think what came out of that, which I'd say is something I'm probably unlearning now quite a bit, is that I learned to be fiercely independent. like, because I had this goal to strive for, and I knew that I had to take on that mantle, and I really didn't want to be a burden to my family, which is, I think, a lot of the narratives that we learn about disability is that concept of being a burden. And heartbreakingly enough, at age 14, I already knew that and felt that. But yeah, so I think my relationship with my disability was very individual for a very long time because of that. So I sort of shied or pulled focus away from it, made sure that people weren't paying attention to it. I very actively did not include myself in the disability community for a very long time. It's only really been in the last few years where I've put my writing and marketing skills and branding skills into building a brand on Instagram. So I now have a disability advocacy account there called Seated Perspectives, and that's given me access to a whole wealth of other disabled folks and other disabled stories and other narratives that do center disabled joy. So to bring it back to the topic that we're talking about today, is that that narrative that I had of disability age 14, that narrative that I sort of perpetuated for years of my own disability, is now being broken and in a good way, and it's being challenged. And this is why I want to keep having conversations like this one, is because disabled joy isn't necessarily spoken about enough. We know there's challenges, and there's also just a reliance on overplaying the tragedy or the burden that disability can be. And that puts a lot of stereotypes on the community, unfortunately. And that's why I'm so dedicated to really centering disabled joy and talking more about it.
So, Ali, here's a question for you. You mentioned after your accident really having that struggle to want to distance yourself from the reality of disability as much as
Mm-hmm,
possible because of the
mm-hmm,
concern of being a burden.
mm-hmm,
If you could talk to someone around that age now that is having that kind of similar experience,
mm-hmm,
um, how would you advise them, or how would you talk with them about maybe how to get out of that mindset to say,
mm-hmm,
how do we accept that challenge, right? Because that is a very real reality that I also feel, right? Not wanting to burden people
mm-hmm,
unnecessarily with the reality of the condition. But how would you
mm-hmm,
encourage that young person to embrace that opportunity as a deepening of relationship? I know that you and I
mm-hmm.
had talked about that in our mentoring meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, how would you address that?
I heard something recently from a good friend of mine who's another disability advocate in the UK, Lucy Webster. And she has a line that goes, "No one is actually independent. Independence is a myth." Like, we all like to believe that
Mm.
everyone goes, like, I think particularly as disabled folks, we're taught to believe that we're supposed to do everything on our own, but no one does
Mhm.
anything on their own. Like, we're all uplifted by a network of people in different ways. We all have different needs, disabled or not. Like, that's just a reality. We all have different needs, and we need different support systems. And some might be less visible and less apparent than others, and that's okay. And I think accepting that, or like having that be the reality, I can already just, even saying it aloud again myself, it's like it feels like there's a release, because it's such a more, it takes the pressure off, right? Like, understanding that everyone needs a different type of support just to be, it takes a lot of the pressure off, and it makes it easier to ask for help. And I think the other thing that's been a recent learning for me, and it probably would have helped me a lot as a teenager trying to be fiercely independent and not wanting anyone to know that I needed help with anything, is that the people who care want to help, and without judgment and without like putting any negative value on you as a person. They want to help, they want to be there, they want to support you. And you asking for help is a gift. It's a gift that people want to receive, and they will see it as a gift. They will see it as an opportunity to deepen their relationship with you. Um, and yeah, I don't know, that's been one of the most beautiful things I've learned, I think, in the last couple of years, where I've become more comfortable asking for help. Yeah, it's been something that now sits at the core of how I see a lot of things.
I can agree with that because as we were sharing earlier and as I was sharing, right, being a product of that broken family relationship, yes, had its
Mm,
challenges and yes, causes concerns for me as I step into to different areas of my life. But what
mhm,
it also gave me was a opportunity to recognize who those true friends and family were.
mhm, mhm.
And
Yeah.
that is, I'm sure that is true for you because one of the facts that we didn't mention is that you have a husband and two lovely doggos.
I
And
do.
having that support network to really build through
Mhm,
experience is super important.
mhm,
One of the chief elements of my story was when I was 12 years old, I came into the foster care system and remained there till I turned 19.
mhm,
And it was there that in the midst of the uncertainty of coming out of the hospital after having a major surgical operation, and not actually getting what I wanted in terms of an outcome. Obviously,
mhm,
going to the foster care system was not the goal I wanted.
mhm,
That's what I needed, and I see that now because in the reality of my parents who love me and love me to the maximum of their capacity, they just could not do what needed to be done to make sure that I could succeed. But it was out of that again through the developing of relationships with the Ministry
mhm,
of Children and Family Development
mhm,
and through one potluck one evening that I was able to meet, don't get emotional, dang it, the people I would call my forever family, some of
mhm,
which are here today. And one of those things is to see their fierce dedication, to want to see me succeed, not just because of the trauma I've experienced, right? There obviously is that. No one wants to see people go through that, but they saw something deeper. And I think what you're pointing to is that ability
mhm,
of your friends around you to say, I remember you telling me the story of needing to go somewhere.
mhm.
And and your usual transport method was not available.
Mhm.
Want to actually tell how that story went?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much that I had to go to North Vancouver and my husband wasn't available. And going from downtown Vancouver to North Vancouver at like rush hour time is like chaos enough as it is. And I did the simple ask of asking a friend to drive me there. Um, and it sounds like a simple thing. It doesn't sound like a big thing, but for me, it's like, okay, making sure I can get into the car, transfer myself. Like, hopefully, the car isn't too high. Like, can we figure out a method? So I'm thinking of all these different things and hoping that they're not going to be scared off by the concept. And like, I got just an overwhelming yes in a few seconds. And then I got on as we were driving
Mm.
back, my friend actually thanked me for asking her because it gave her the chance to show up for me in a different way. Um, and that was, I don't know, it was just a really special exchange. And I think I'm always so worried about the fact that there are some ways that I can't show up for my friends, or like I can't really help them move. I can sort of wave the pom poms and be supportive by the moving truck, but like can't really do much else. Um, and but I can I know there are tons of other valuable ways that I do show up for my friends, and I have my love language that's very much mine. Um, but I don't know why I still sort of get so caught up in that. And I didn't realize that the same was true on the other side, that there were way like that I have friends who are worried that they're not able to show up for me in a way that would be useful or helpful because I've never asked. So sort of opening that door is a really special shift in the relationship, I think.
Right. And that points to the reality of the importance of having and developing a strong support network.
Mm,
And the people who are joining us in the audience today, you might be wondering, again, maybe you work with someone with a disability, maybe you love someone with a disability, well, or whatever your relationship to disability is. Maybe you're just curious, how can I be more actively actively involved in supporting and challenging and journeying with the people in my life with disabilities. Let me just say, it's not a special thing. It is just being present.
Mhm.
It is recognizing that disability is part of the experience, absolutely, but it is not the defining experience of our lives. To say, sometimes if you're me, you need to be gently said, hey, maybe that's not a good idea, and then be like, oh yeah, you know what, not a good idea. Or um, maybe maybe it's a case of just needing to be present.
Mhm.
Maybe it's a case of asking questions. Do not be afraid to ask questions, because it's in asking questions that that door to opening a deeper level of relationship is there. Right? It is no secret for Ali and I that our disabilities are visible.
Mhm.
Other disabilities that are not as visible.
Mhm.
That's true. So what do you do in those cases? Well, you expect more and work backwards if necessary.
Mhm.
It is always good to assume more and then have to adjust to where that person is at, than to shoot low and have there be hurt and offense caused, even if it's unintentional. And so to say, how do you be an effective support person? You just be you. You recognize, that for this relationship to be a success, there is comfort, there is challenge, there is moments to give advice and moments to listen, just as there would be in any relationship. It is the ability to be able to recognize who that person is for who they are, both because of and in spite of their disability. That's going to allow you to be an effective support network that recognizes the struggle and yet celebrates the victories and helps navigate through those difficult moments. Ali, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I would just say, I mean, in terms of asking questions, I think it's just a case of like relying on people's comments, on your common sense to some extent. I think
Mhm.
obviously if you wouldn't ask a non-disabled person about their medical history, maybe you don't ask a disabled person about their medical history either. That's just a fairly basic
Yeah.
assumption. But I think in terms of showing up as a support network, just asking how can I help or what can I do to make this more comfortable, more accessible, more, I mean, regardless of whether our disability is visible or not, it's just like what would make this situation the most comfortable to you,
Mhm.
and then listening, because that's
Mhm.
the other half that doesn't always happening is listening and absorbing that information and remembering it in the next situation. And I think the
Mhm.
step beyond that is taking on a bit of the load, because one of the realities of disability is that it does require resilience and forethought and planning and checking ahead, and that sounds like little things, but they add up to being quite a big load to carry. So I think what sometimes surprises me and it shouldn't is when sort of friends or family will call ahead to a restaurant and make sure that it's accessible, or like ask me when they've invited me to their home whether this will work or that will work, just because they've done that extra thinking, and that means I don't have to do it. So I think that's just another, and what they call access intimacy, which I think is such a beautiful term. That's a lovely way for a support network to show up.
Mhm. Right, recognizing the uniqueness of the situation, but also trying to blend it in so it's as
Mm-hmm.
it's as fluid of a movement as it
Mm-hmm.
could. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Ali and I both recognize there's moments where fluidity is not going to be possible. Sometimes you call ahead to a restaurant and it's not accessible, despite the fact that they say it is. Um, but
And that's
when,
why we call.
yeah, but even when we call and they're like, yeah, it's fine, and then there's like a sill at the
Mm,
door that you can't get over.
yeah.
That's, I mean, for me, like, yeah, that can be disappointing, but it's all about intentionality, and that kind of
Mm,
is a good segue to individual responsibility, in this sense that um part of the um the company, the brand I built, Overcoming Chronicles, kind of the slogan that was developed under that is that helping people recognize that it is stories, relationships, and self-discovery that make life meaningful. And so fostering an environment where your story can be told, and you can sit with your story of experience. You can understand the challenges, the heartache, the disappointments of that, and yet you can see that you've been given an opportunity to use that to say, you know what, that was really hard, but that also allowed me to become who I am today. For example, as I said earlier, if I hadn't come into foster care all those years ago, I wouldn't have met the family that I was looking for. That doesn't mean I don't love my biological one. That's very much still true. But to see the support network that they couldn't provide was then provided in that experience. To say that the speaking ability I have would not have been provided if I had not fallen in love with education and all of those good things. Ali, what are some examples in your life where you look back at your story, some of those joys and some of those sorrows, that you go, you know what? I'm glad that happened because.
yeah, it's interesting. I think about this a lot because if every time I think about my relationship with my husband, it's like
Mm.
there's so many different things that needed to happen for us to meet when we did, like in university and residence. And he's also from another country. He's from Azerbaijan and had moved to somewhere else and like did a whole bunch of decisions before he arrived at university. So like there's already that side. But then for me, like if I hadn't had my accident or my injury, I might have chosen a different school that wasn't as sort of metropolitan. I might have, like, there are a lot of different things. I might not have stayed in residence for my second year of university, which is what allowed me to meet him. Like, there are a lot of different things. So I think it's really interesting for me to sometimes sit back and think and realize that my life would have been very, very, very different, not just in the scope of disabled or not, but it would have just been very different if I hadn't had my injury. And obviously, there's some mourning for that, and there's some grieving that happens for that life that every so often I feel like I get close to it. I don't know. This might be a little woo woo for some people, and that's fine. It is for me too. But every so often, I don't know, when I travel somewhere or I'm in a specific experience, I feel like I come close to that timeline. And that's probably when I'll grieve it a little bit. Um, but, but grief can exist alongside joy is what I've realized. And the life that I have now is one that I love. And as Tagen mentioned, I've got my husband, I've got my two dogs who I adore. I live in this beautiful city and I have a lot of privilege that comes with the life that I have, despite my disability. I think that's another thing that's important to recognize is that there can be privilege and disability at the same time. And yeah, I think that's a lot of the reflection that I've done over the last couple of years is really embracing the life that I do have and recognizing the joy in it. Um, and really living in what Rebecca Tausig calls the both and of disability, which is messy and beautiful and holds and multiple truths. Um, yeah, I think that's where I'm at in my reflection at the moment too.
It's all good. And see, that's why I love this conversation,
Mm,
because I experienced that somewhat differently, because this
mm,
has been my entire life. There hasn't been
mhm,
a moment where these limitations have not been
mm,
part of my part of my existence. But I'll share a brief example and how that has helped me actually. And then we'll move to the Q&A session so we can keep the time so that everyone can get out and vote in the provincial election if you haven't already, all that good stuff. But to say 2 summers ago, yeah, 2 summers ago, I worked for Vancouver Island University with the Universal Access team, and we were using the Rick Hansen Foundation rating scale for accessibility and all that stuff. We were at least familiar with that, and we were going to different classrooms on campus. VIU is a campus built on a hill, so that's always fun. Thank goodness I have a power wheelchair to get me up and down it. But one of the things that became super apparent in a way that it hadn't been before, because disability has been my entire life, this is all I've known, was actually realizing the sheer intensity of that limitation. And going into classrooms and seeing if there was a person in a wheelchair who wanted to lecture there. They would not be able to see the standard setups and configurations that exist and realizing, oh, I can't reach that. My chair can't fit there. And yes, that is a built environment challenge, and that's a whole nother discourse in disabled thought, disability studies and all that jazz, the impact of the built environment. But again, I would encourage anyone who is challenged by that, as Ali has said, is that although there are those challenges that exist, it is that reality of dependence, at least in my life, pardon me, at least in my life, that have given me the opportunity to run back again to the reality of dependence, and that dependence is not a bad thing. Because it is in that sharing, that reciprocal relationship that I am strengthened, I am corrected, I am comforted in the midst of that challenge. And that is an important thing to note. That again, it does come back to saying individually, how am I going to respond to this? But we only respond as good as those we have around us in some sense, right? It's to say, what has shaped our responses? You know, whether that is faith or whether that is a particular foundational experience. We all have those things that form the way we respond to both tragedy and victory. And so to say, in the midst of the uncertainty of what the disabled life can be sometimes, what has it given me the opportunity to do? You know, Ali and I met because of disability. That was part of the point. You know, being able to be being able to be a voice in classrooms, to say things that may not have been said by anyone else. Being able to make disabled jokes and say, you can laugh at that, because if we don't laugh at that, there's nothing but tragedy. To challenge those expectations, to say, no, you can be a brand creator, you can be more than an advocate, you can be a teacher, a pastor, whatever it is in your gift set. Those are the wonderful things that you are equipped to do. And so the kind of final kind of encouragement I would give to our friends who have joined us is recognize that you're part of helping that individual or individuals in your life, or yourselves as well, to say, what are those gifts that I have? It is my privilege as a person who is in relationship with whoever that is in your life to say, I see these giftings in you. Have you thought about exercising them this way? Because if that doesn't happen, and there isn't that challenge to see yourself in relationship to disability, not defined by it, um, that is going to lead to possibly can often lead to a sense of despair if there is not those people around to comfort and to say, hey, that's really hard, but look at what you've been able to accomplish. All right, with that, let's move to a time of Q&A. So if you have a question, you should be able to tap the react button on Zoom and raise your hand. If you can't do that, feel free to just unmute your mic or write your questions in the chat. Ali and I will both be monitoring that. Kathy has her hand up.
Oh, thanks so much, both of you. This is actually very powerful. I don't know if you want to stop recording now during the Q&A or do you want to just keep running it?
Sure, let's stop recording now. Actually makes the editing easier.
Easier.